Charlie Brown. Womp, 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 womp. Okay, so the first time I was ever introduced to this notion of the primary, secondary, and tertiary economies came from reading a Robert Reich book back in the, maybe early 90s. Reich was the Secretary of Labor, or something like that, under President Clinton. So you know what his perspective is. But let me go through these primary, tertiary, and secondary, but not in that order. And we'll talk about what they are. So these are essentially different ways of thinking about different components of the economy. And as things develop, you can move to the next layer. All right? So an extractive economy, a primary economy, is one where you are taking things from the earth and selling it. It's as straightforward as that. I mean, right? So primary economies, extractive economies are going to include logging. Trees grow, I cut them down. Now we have lumber and we have paper, right? A farmer, corn grows, I cut it down, I got corn, right? Before the corn, there's not really another step. Before the tree, there's not really another step. If I'm a coal miner, I gotta go in, I gotta dig up the coal, you're taking it out. If I'm a fisher, if I'm a shepherd, right? All of these are extraction level economies. And having spent big chunks of my life in rural areas by definition are places where the economy is extractive. If you're in Nebraska, you're growing corn. If you're in Georgia, near as I can tell, you're growing cotton or trees. If you're in southern Indiana, I don't know what they grow. More corn, a little bit of hemp. But right, you're taking stuff out of the earth. If you are on the East Coast, you're going to be, lobsters and fishes. If you're on the West Coast, maybe it's salmon. I don't know. Now, if you pay attention, you'll notice that this pairs up nicely with the discussion of different kinds of societies moving through this series of those. So up until the advent of farming, everything would have been extraction, right? So up until 10,000 years ago, basically everybody was an extractive laborer. Hunters and gatherers, all the rest of them. Now, then you get to the secondary level, the manufacturing economy, the industrial economy, and this is what grounded the U.S. Economic power throughout the 1900s. It was the solidity of our manufacturing sector. I don't remember if it's Trenton or Newark, but one of those towns, as you're leaving Manhattan, you pass by, you're going across a bridge, and there's a sign. We'll say Trenton just for fun. And it says, Trenton makes, the world takes. And the idea there is you're building products that you're going to be able to sell all around the world. All the Rust Belt cities of the industrial north, from Chicago through Cincinnati, Cleveland, Buffalo, and all the way out the Great Lakes to Philly, all of those were factory cities. The rise and fall of Detroit is the rise and fall of the industrial economy. Now, there have been people who have said, and I haven't read it, so I'm just going to mention it, you guys can go read it if you care, that say one way to interpret the Civil War, for instance, is between an evolving industrial North who wants to be at that next level, and an agricultural South, which is still at the extractive level. Here's another thing to think about. Just because your economy moves to the next level, just because you've moved to an industrial economy, doesn't mean your previous level is less important. If anything, it's more important, right? You cannot have a good, solid, stable, strong manufacturing economy if you can't guarantee good quality, consistent, inexpensive delivery of the extractive elements that go into it, right? How are you going to run a coal-fired power plant if you can't count on the coal? How are you going to make cheese doodles and corn syrup for your sweet tea if your farmers aren't delivering corn, right? You need it, and it's built into it. But moving to that second level actually allows those benefits of the manufacturing to feed back into what you're doing at the level before and free up these people. So if anything, a good manufacturing economy relies upon an even more efficient, even more stable extraction economy. And then you move to this next level, and the exact same thing happens again. We go from a manufacturing economy to what's been called all sorts of things. Goods and services, post-industrial, or just a plain old tertiary. Tertiary is a $10 word for third. The tertiary economy. And again, you see the same pattern. As we all move to jobs where we sit and look at a computer, right, the number of manufacturing workers starts to decline. But it doesn't mean manufacturing has gone away. If anything, manufacturing has gotten better. They can build more stuff with fewer people. And in the case of offshoring the factories, we're building more stuff while spending less money. Instead of investing in individual people, we're investing in cheaper people. So it's still more efficient for us. Not only that, all of that computer technology that we developed in the post-industrial or third sector goes back to greatly improve the speed and efficiency of the manufacturing processes. Now it's a problem if your job is as a factory worker, but that individual aside, the system gets better and faster as we go through. Now, I mentioned Robert Reich, and indeed he was Clinton's labor secretary, and he's also continued writing. He's kept his career up, and I think he just came out with another book. But this was an interesting book because in the early 90s, he's making the argument, look, as the country's moving this way, how do we best position the U.S. to actually to have an effective post-industrial economy in a world that's becoming increasingly competitive. Now, being a Democrat, it's hardly a surprise. His suggestions run towards investing in education. You know, what you want to do with it is up to you. But I think it's important to recognize that he sees this deindustrialization as a potential problem, and in thinking strategically, how can we be on the plus side, the winning side of that tertiary economy, right? Because there's also a losing side. The losing side, as it says, burger flipping at one end, lawyering and software at the other. If you want to go be a physician, you're working on people, they pay you well, some of them are paid well. That's one way to make money. Lawyering is another way to make money. Being a good software engineer in an up-and-coming environment is a good way to make money. Those are all service jobs. You're writing code for someone, you're fixing someone's knees, you're helping somebody deal with their taxes, whatever. But there are more than enough less good service jobs out there. Most people don't aspire to being a burger flipper for their whole life. But in the absence of agricultural jobs, and in the absence of factory jobs, a person that's not skilled doesn't have a ton of other options. And that's why this particular character is arguing for investing in education, so that we can be at the front end, right, getting those good jobs. Essentially, he's trying to make sure that even if that Apple computer is made in China, that Apple's headquarters stay in California, that the best coders are here in the States, that the people who are innovating and building new businesses and coming up with new ideas for the economy are here in the United States. And the other thing that's interesting about this character's book is 20 years old, and indeed in post-industrialization, deindustrialization has gotten worse than I think even he expected at the time. And given the fluidity of today's world, there's even less to keep the most talented in your country, if that's where you want them to be. Now, oops, again, that's Reich. What kind of questions do you have about those, about the economy slices? Go ahead, Billy.
What would be the conservative perspective on the way to handle post-industrial America?
Well, the conservative perspective is almost always to promote individual freedom and responsibility, and especially innovation and business growth, right? So rather than say, here you go. I believe that the conservatives would focus on the policies that are going to keep Silicon Valley being a center of entrepreneurial growth. And there are a variety of these around in different industries. And a big component of that is going to be keep the startup costs low. If you want to start a business, we're going to make sure that your taxes are low. We're going to make sure your barriers to hiring and firing are low. We want to make sure that if you've got a background and you've got the idea, that you can actually make it work. You could argue, if you really wanted to do some sort of intervention, but you were on this side, you could argue for something that would make capital more available to you, but that's not really conservative, but people would say it. Go ahead.
Well, with that perspective, with the way that other conservative laws, policies, so on go, it's not solving the issue of American jobs going out of the country because it's still cheaper. I mean, we're so stifled as far as patent law goes, trade laws, everything, and all those made by conservatives themselves. It's still cheaper to outsource than it is to hire inside and have the manufacturing here in the United States. So
yeah, I think that there's kind of two things there. There's the conservative thought intellectually, and there's where the rubber meets the road. And one of the problems you're going to bump into is conservatives, quote unquote, are pro-patent law. But if you think about the scale of the businesses these people are working for, it's one thing to be pro-patent law and be working for pharma, which is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry. Notice that dialing back patent law a little bit, patent protection a little bit, would absolutely open the floor for more people to get in with more new ideas a little bit earlier. So you can argue that that would be a conservative perspective. So, but you're going to find those kind of contradictions everywhere you look throughout the political spectrum. Yeah. So I think ideologically or intellectually, anything that's going to keep that barrier to entry low so that people who have new ideas can actually try it out. One that I've heard entrepreneurs complain about, and maybe some of you guys have bumped into this, is that it's one thing to start your own shindig and hire a few people. You get 5 to 10 people, you've got a steady business going, things are great. Now, you want to grow that business, but there's a point, and I don't know what it is, somewhere after 30 and long before you get to 100, where different sets of labor rules kick in so that many businesses grow to here and are flat out capped, right? Whereas to get past this, you need to make a jump in accounts coming in and revenue coming in because now you've got much higher costs. So a pro-business approach would actually say, let's take whatever this gap is and figure out how to smooth that transition so you can grow and scale it up. Because if you've got a good enough idea to keep scaling up, we don't necessarily want you to stop there. If it's a good idea and it's really bringing positive benefits to the market and people are happily willing to pay for it. Notice, everybody likes to pick on Walmart, but we happily keep going there and giving them our money. No one's holding a gun to our head. If you can, of course, Walmart's like up here, but if you can smooth that transition, then you can get good ideas and better products and services out to the public, right? But again, you know, I've only heard people talk about this, people who are innovators, to borrow the terminology. That's good. You were putting your hand up, Jamie?
Also, like the taxes and stuff that kind of hurt people, because I know a friend of mine, he like does the whole like trading cards things. But it's like him and another private seller, but now they just made a tax where it actually hurts him now than helps him. Whereas before he was making a lot of money from it. And so he can even do that now.
Selling cars.
Because now he has, and it's not like he has like a big old parking lot, like he, you know, may trade, you know, like his car for another car and then make some money off of it. But since he, I don't know, he didn't tell me everything, but since he's done it so many times, they're making him have to get a dealership license, and then he has to be taxed every time that he does that.
Yeah. And you know, anyone who is up on this stuff will point out the argument that any taxes you ask whatsoever are going to, it's a drag on the economy, right? Because so your friend, he's trading 3, 4, 5 cars a year. It can't be much more than that because whatever that number is pretty low. I know what you're talking about. And he's making money. It's a good thing. This guy's happy with the cars. This guy's happy with his cars. He's making a tidy profit. It is what it is, right? But if you're a dealer, then there's a whole other set of costs. And that set of costs means now if he wants to do it, he actually has to sell not just one more car a year, but he has to sell many more cars a year. So he might go, instead of going from a 5-car a year, a guy, growing it to 7 or 8 cars a year, which could be a nice little side income. Doesn't have to be your whole job, but it provides a little income on the side, moves vehicles through the system, great thing. But if he can only go from 5 and he can't go to 7, he can't go to 8, he has to go to 20 or 25, well then immediately he needs a lot. He needs electricity to keep his lot lit. He needs security. He needs, and all of that because of those taxes. And so every tax that goes to the government, so if I sell something and I make $10, every tax that goes to the government is money that I don't get to have and which I don't spend further down. So, and that's going to go along with Billy's perspective too. If you put taxes on entrepreneurs, then you're going to have fewer entrepreneurs. And notice how, and this is worth thinking about when you start thinking too polemically about the system we have, how many small business people do we have and how many gigantic corporations do we have? Because at some point, the only entities that can afford those taxes are entities of scale. So that as the taxes go up, you can absolutely make the argument that what you end up killing are the individual entrepreneurs, the people with small single income jobs, and the only companies that can make it are the very, very large ones. Go ahead.
Okay, this is probably off topic, but I have to ask this question. Why is it that, I don't know if you know this or not, but this is first-hand basis on insurance. Why is it that companies who have good insurance are going to be penalized for having good insurance and not being reliable on the government's insurance?
I don't know what you mean.
Not to get into too much detail, but my dad works at Georgia Power.
Okay.
And right now they have really good insurance.
Okay.
And the CEO came to them in Macon. The CEO of Georgia Power talked to them about a new, like, I guess a bill or a law or something that's going through called some kind of big, like if you have good insurance, if your company provides better insurance than the government can provide, you will be penalized and taxed and charged for it.
I can't speak to that. If somebody was posting that on the internet, I would copy it into Snopes and see what was coming up, because that just sounds too good to be true from a, like, we hate Obamacare perspective. Does that make sense?
I mean, well, it's got to be
No, actually, that is what's happening. I've actually done some research on it, as Obamacare goes through, the private insurance, as he's saying, like his dad's insurance or whatever, is gonna have to go up because they can't afford it, because, and,
Why can't they afford it?
I can't remember exactly, I'll look it up and I'll bring it back Thursday, but,
Yeah, if you kick me a link, that would be awesome.
yeah, but but what's eventually going to be happening is the private insurers are going to be so expensive because they have to compete with Obamacare that nobody is going to be able to afford it. So what's eventually going to end up happening if Obamacare goes through is everybody, even people who don't want to be on it, have to go through and be on the Obamacare.
Yeah, I really can't comment on that. I would have to see the assumptions they're making to build that
I'll
argument.
send you a link Thursday.
Yeah, okay. Let's move to this because I don't actually know that much about Obamacare.
Yeah, I was about to ask, like, why does, like, it doesn't affect me that much, so I haven't focused on it, but why does everybody hate it so much?
Everybody in Georgia hates it
Why?
because they vote Republican.
Yeah, because we're
So, I'm not other people's that.
I don't know.
Here's what I know about Obamacare, and I swear to you, it is this much. The thing about Obamacare that makes it tricky is, for me at least, is I can't even peg it on one side or the other. So I don't even know where to start analyzing it from. If you're a conservative, there's so much on left. There's so much on this side that that you're not going to like it just because. If you're a liberal, however, there's a lot of reason to dislike it too. And the nice thing about a policy that's going to make everybody mad is it might actually work, but it might also not. The things that the conservatives don't like are essentially it's a government-funded plan, period. You're not going to come up with a government-funded plan the conservatives are going to like no matter what. So that's point number one. How it's implemented, the stuff people are complaining about specifically, that's what I don't actually know. The stuff that the liberals don't like are that this is not the government-funded plan that liberals wanted. When liberals dream of what they're aiming for, it's we want a government-paid healthcare system like Britain or any of the other Nordic countries that we've spoken about. They want government health. This isn't government health by any stretch of the imagination. This is government funding insurance companies to do things. And liberals don't necessarily like insurance companies, if that makes sense. So what you end up with, now, the reason it might work is because the whole point behind involving the insurance companies is to get the insurance companies who are already involved in the market and who are already concerned with the cost of care to get them actually policing the market and making it work. Also, one of the problems with insurance companies is if you're expensive, they don't want to hire you. Not hire, to cover you. Thank you. And the reason for that is you're expensive. They're running a business. So by mandating everyone's in, you make the plan, the pool, much, much bigger, and that brings the cost down. So that's why I say it's hard for me to slice and dice this, because the man's trying to take a market approach using government money, but because it's a market approach and not a government approach, the left is mad. Because it's government money and not private money, the right is mad. And I have, beyond that, you're just going to have to look into it more. That's a fair question. All right?
Still off topic, but I guess the main problem that I have with it, or that I may have with it, because I may not know that much like you said, but I know for a fact that if a homeless person goes to the hospital, it is illegal for the hospital to deny them service. Like say a homeless guy gets shot.
Right.
They have to help him.
Right.
So what if he can afford it? He can walk out the door, get the bill, who cares? He's not going to pay it, he doesn't have the money for it. But the
Right.
hospital has to give him service anyway. So what is the point in implementing a care service when it doesn't matter if you pay or not?
Well, that brings up like 2 or 3 interesting thoughts. The first is, and maybe this is implied in what you're saying, but that's already true, right? So So Obamacare doesn't change any of that. The second one, and aren't you Catholic educated? You take some courage to argue that a hospital should be allowed to deny a shot homeless man service at the emergency room.
Why, if it's already there, why implement another program to pay for it?
Yeah, and I don't have an answer to that. Billy?
The answer to your question is what the hospital is actually required to do is just to stabilize them
Yeah,
and then let them go.
yeah.
So you're not talking about full health care. He's just, okay, he's been shot, let's remove the bullet, okay, he's alive. Now we have to put him back out onto the street.
Yeah.
The point for specifically Obamacare is like he's talking about, you're talking about millions of Americans who cannot get health insurance because the health insurance companies won't cover them. Before Obamacare, I did not qualify for insurance because I was too fat. Now, when you take in consideration that 65% of the American population is obese, so that's 65% of Americans who can't get insurance. Now, I'm not saying that I'm for Obamacare or against Obamacare because I have my own views as an entrepreneur, but it was definitely helpful for me because just the beginning stages of it, it enabled me to insure. And my ex-wife, she had diabetes. Because she had diabetes and we didn't have insurance before she found out they wouldn't insure her because she has a pre-existing condition.
And you know what's interesting about that is that you bring up both sides of that problem. I don't know if you're intending to. So the first thing is, if you care, you can Google up and find, and you're probably going to find it more on Democratic sites, but you'll find dozens of just awesome horror stories about exactly what Billy just said. They removed the bullet, they slapped a Band-Aid on, and then they drove him across town in an unmarked car and set him in front of the Catholic hospital, right? And you go, really? Now, I don't know if it's true, but it makes for very entertaining reading on the internet. The second thing is, and this gets a little bit technical, I don't want to bore you, I don't want to lose you, but the point Billy's making is actually a very important point. You run an insurance system because you will make money covering this large pool. If I have 100 people and I know that their healthcare costs for this year are going to be $10,000, then I have to collect $11,000 from them, okay? Now, some of those people aren't going to cost anything. Some of those people are going to have children, but on average, $10,000 is what I'm aiming for, and I can ensure, I can make a profit if I charge a little bit more. One way to get rid of that you have to cover is to throw off the diabetics and young women. You know what young women do? They get pregnant. That's friggin' expensive. You know what diabetics do? They get their feet sawed off. That's expensive. So we'll get rid of them, right? And insurance companies have been doing this, and let's face it, in a private capitalist system, it's their right to. There is nothing wrong with this. It leaves the diabetic footless and the pregnant woman, pregnant, but, well, I guess nothing's going to fix that. But there you go, right? So this is where the Obamacare, this is why I say, by trying to increase that pool, you're bringing in people who, by making the pool bigger, the diabetic doesn't cost so much. Especially when you consider that a huge chunk of folks who are uninsured are young people. You know what's nice about young people? Aside from getting pregnant and crashing their car, they don't really do much else that costs in terms of healthcare. So if you can bring in 10 million 20-year-old men and women, you've made the pool like this, and your overall costs are brought down. So now the diabetic and the pregnant woman aren't so bad, if that makes sense.
And not to, and just to also throw out there, Obamacare, it's expensive. Like, I may now be able to have coverage, but it is 3 times as expensive as what the average person will be paying in a monthly premium for regular-based insurance. Like, before they found out I was fat, Blue Cross Blue Shield was quoting me like, $75 a month, for basic coverage, and Obamacare cost me $297 a month.
You need to send in pictures of Vin Diesel. Say, it's all meat, man. Okay. Now, I threw myself off a bit easier.
He does that to me too.
I hear that at home. Here's the second problem. If 65% of Americans are overweight, suffering from some sort of metabolic system, notice that's actually going to screw the system up. Because if we bring in hundreds of thousands or millions of 20-somethings that aren't going to cost us anything, then we made the pool bigger, that's great. If we bring in all sorts of expensive people, then in fact that what we're paying out in terms of healthcare just went up, 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 up. It's a little bit nervous-defying.
And how many of them are unemployed?
Pardon?
And how many of them are unemployed?
And it
Yeah,
also,
I think it's better.
and
Well,
also
hold on,
goes-
go ahead, Chris.
That's
I've been
that's the
ignoring you for a
question-
long time.
That's the question that I had, like, see, because I'm under the impression that you get your health insurance and life insurance from your job, because I work part-time at Kroger, and they already offer me full health care, full everything.
Kroger has a union.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I mean, my dad works at Georgia Power, he gets insurance, my mom
They
works
have
at
a
Home
union.
Depot.
Go to Walmart. At Walmart, you can't get insurance until after you work there for 2 years. And that's because the employees don't want a union.
Yeah, but
Want.
my mom
Yeah.
works at Home Depot.
I mean, there are lots of jobs that offer health insurance, but what if you're at a job that doesn't offer health insurance?
Right. Now, in all fairness, the free market answer to that is, if that's not going to work for you, don't work at Walmart. The larger picture problem that I see coming up, or not problem, but one of the tertiary effects, might be that it becomes untoward for a company to keep offering health insurance. I can't think of a lot of companies that are thrilled that they have to offer health insurance. It's not something that traditionally happened. It sort of came up, my understanding of it is it came up in the 70s during stagflation when when you weren't allowed to raise prices or whatever, very free market there. And so companies started offering this, and then it became the de facto way of doing it. And there are a lot of reasons to say tying your health insurance into your job isn't the best way to do it, but that's what we've ended up with. You may see a divorce of those two things if companies, let's face it, companies aren't humans. They don't have feelings or souls, and they're not supposed to. We don't expect them to. So when a company says, why are we wasting all this money on this? We'll just give everybody a $2 an hour across the board raise, and then we all go, yee-haw! And then you walk over to the government system or the private system and say, ooh, this is expensive. Who knows how it's like, and that's the thing, is the way this pans out, it could go a lot of different directions. I'm not confident saying, yeah, it's going to work, rah, rah, government health, and I'm not confident saying, it's going to bring down capitalism as we know it. This is just, of all the things that are out there, this is one of the fewest that makes that kind of sense to me. Jamie, you were going to say?
Also with Obamacare, once it gets to where we insure everybody, it goes into like the donor system where, first in, first get it. So that leads to less people actually getting the health care they need because they're on this long list. And then you have them people, hold on. And then
Okay.
you also have them people that now that they have free insurance, they're always sick. There are people they're out there like that, and
all
they're
right.
always going.
Yeah, there's two different things here, and these are actually important points. First of all, what you're talking about is rationing. Rationing pisses off every conservative I can think of. The free market system rations as well. You know this. You call it price, right? So the free market system, you can say, I don't know what I want. I want a knee replacement because I'm old and my knee hurts. And although when you're old your knee hurts, that seems kind of brutal. But this is something I'm willing to pay for or not. Cosmetic surgery is already like this. I'm going to get lipo or I'm not. Or I'm going to get, de-wrinklified or I'm not. Because it costs money and I don't want to spend the money. So that's the way it rations now. And in truth, if you think about it from a big picture, those who have healthcare systems and those who don't is the same thing as price. So right now, the knee surgeries are rationed towards those who have insurance and away from those who don't have insurance. That's a price system. It rations. Everything in the world, there's more want than there's stuff to go around, so there must be some sort of sorting system. So before we say, well, there's long lines, yeah, there may be, we need to be absolutely clear, capitalist systems, free market systems, ration through price. You choose what you want, and you pay for it, or you choose to save your money. Now, government systems do have to come up with some way to do it. I've heard stories about the lines. I've also heard, like Oz, Australia, there's lines, but you can also pay for private care if you want. There are lots of different ways to do it, but you're right, then somebody else is making the decisions. What was the second point you made?
You know how now that
Have contracts.
there's free healthcare, quote unquote.
Oh, yeah.
You have the people that are always sick.
So I would say, if I was to make a criticism of the system we have now, actually I take that back, there's about 14 criticisms of the system we have now. But one of them absolutely is that in order for a market, so work with me on this, in order for a market system to work, we have to have information, right? You need to know what your options are. You need to know who your separate providers might be. You need to know how much things might cost, right? You need to know all these different things. Notice in our system, if you took a prescription this morning, do you know what the cash value of that prescription is? Probably not. If you saw a doctor for your allergies, thanks to all this wonderful yellow dust we have around here, I love Georgia. If you went and saw a doctor for your allergies, do you know what the cash cost of that was? And the answer is absolutely not. Because the price distortions that come from, okay, like I said, for a free market system to work, you need congruence between the provider, the prices, the buyer, and the knowledge to make those choices. That has completely been removed from the equation. And health insurance is expensive. So if you're on a family plan, you're paying somewhere in the neighborhood, or your employer is, of like $8,000 a year, right? Now I think, and this is the way the argument goes, I think $8 grand, that was a lot of money. The kid has the sniffles. We're going to the doctor. Now, this is a private system. This is a system that the conservatives like. However, I'm taking my kid to the doctor for nothing but sniffles. I go to the doctor says, all right, here's an over-the-counter antihistamine. Here's the neatest, newest, most expensive branded one. Well, now the over-the-counter antihistamine isn't on my insurance plan at all because it's OTC. The neatest, newest, branded, expensive one has a $25 copay. All right? The fact that it's going to get billed at $150 or $200 to my insurance company is completely outside of my realm of things. So I spent $8,000. I feel like I deserve to A, go to the doctor when I need to, and B, get the good drugs. That $25 is not a price signal to me versus the $4 generic at Walmart. And that's why generics are $4. They're so cheap and your copays are $20. But if you think I paid for a Cadillac system, I want the best drugs, that $20 is not the deterrent that $200 would be. So you're right, in a free government healthcare system, you have that problem. And I've heard doctors in government systems in other countries say, there's no responsibility, people just go to the doctor for nothing. What you need to recognize is we're already suffering partly from that, because in our system, the people that make the decisions on the drugs are the doctors. They don't know the price. The people that make the decisions on what you're going to buy are you. The price information's hidden. The people who make the decisions on what the copay and what the pricing are is the insurance company. All they see is the price. They don't see anything else. So you've got, like, it's a really weird system we have. We've got the distortions in the free market that you would expect from a socialist system with, weirdly, all of the inequality and lack of care for the poor that you would expect from a capitalist system. Like, I have no love for our system at all. I'm not sure, but there you go. So that's a good one. All right, Chris, but then we really got to go to the next one.
Do you know, or do you not know, the problem that all the doctors are having? Because I've heard a lot of rumors, and a lot of doctors say that they're not going to work if it goes through.
Yeah, because they get paid less, they have to work more hours, there's more patients.
Physicians
I
have,
mean, other than the wage, is there any other issue with it?
so that's actually an interesting problem, and I think it represents, I don't know, because I don't know, that it represents a fundamental flaw of Obamacare. What I do know is that physicians right now feel fairly underappreciated, fairly overworked, and fairly undercompensated. Doctors? What? Doctors are rich, right? No, actually, over the last 30 or 40 years, there's been a very, very long history of physicians going from independent contractors or office holders, independent business people, who made decent money, had their own client list, i.e. patients they dealt with, and when they worked for a hospital, worked again as contractors. They had a lot of, and we're going to get to this in a few minutes, they had a lot of freedom and a lot of choice and a lot of control, and yes, they were definitely well compensated. But as HMOs developed through the 80s, and as HMOs grew in scale, they started eating up small offices, they started eating up small hospitals, so that eventually you've got a handful of gigantic hospital chains, and so the doctors are working inside of these gigantic hospital chains. Doctors at the bottom, the IMs, the internal medicines, the general practitioners, the baby docs, the people who are seeing a lot of people, the folks that are seeing a lot of people, they're the ones that the systems, they got in. They're employees now, just like you are wherever you work. They're getting a paycheck. They're not independent business people. Not only that, because someone else is writing checks, and someone else is determining the patient flow, and someone else is determining the treatment algorithms, right? They start having to follow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They see their decision-making properties, their agency, shrinking, right? They also see the amount of paperwork, because we do have a very paperwork-laden system, exploding. So, and they see their patient load climbing. Now, if you're an independent contractor, sometimes you'll have business, sometimes you won't. So the plus side is they've always got business coming in, they can take vacation when they want. They don't have the headaches of an independent contractor. But they're getting squeezed, right? And so what looks like good income on paper, a lot of it ends up going to stuff like malpractice insurance, but a lot of it has been going down. A general practitioner might not make more than $100,000 nowadays, which if you consider I spent my 20s in college and med school, and then I did rounds, so that now I can spend 4 minutes with a patient and work 10 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week. For that kind of life, I would want more than a Camry. I can't blame them. And not only, but they don't get more than a Camry. Like, it's really shocking that way. But it's, again, it's not something you see because you go to your doctor, they're part of this, you know, it's just a logo up in the corner of the building that says, we belong to this health chain. And you get your insurance checks, and that's that. You just go to the doctor, and, right? You don't see behind the scenes that they're getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. There is still a lot of money to be made in doctoring in the right specialties. And even some of those specialties highlight some of the problems with the system. Cancer is a huge moneymaker. I mean, isn't that kind of sad? So, but that's just one of those things. So these guys, they're in that environment. Somebody says, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to introduce a system where you get to see even more patients. We're going to cap what you're allowed to take on it. And, you know, I can see them saying, you know, this is, you know, how could you make it worse? This is how. And that's why I say that is, I know that there's 15 or 20 years, there are 15 or 20 years of frustration here, that Obamacare ends up being a hypothetical at this point. It won't be hypothetical in 3 years when it's fully implemented, and we'll have to see what happens. But, so there you go. That was your question.
Right.
All right, now let me, yeah, we got time. So one of the things that's kind of important about this is when we talk about moving between these different kinds of economies, at every level, people end up unemployed. I'm sure you guys are all aware of it just because you live here, but I was a little bit surprised to find that in 1900 to 1940, there was a tremendous mass migration of American blacks from the South to the North, like I said, through the 1920s and 30s and even into the 40s. And why was that? Well, it was actually because the machines had taken over the people's jobs in cotton. So, on one hand, you've got this whole labor force, and now machines can do the work. They're unemployed. So, what do? They go up north and get jobs in the industrial system. But without an industrial manufacturing system, do you think you would have mechanical cotton gin and mechanical harvesting systems and all this mechanical stuff so that people wouldn't be needed? And the answer is no. On the one hand, you know, I hope the folks who moved had a good life, whatever. On the one hand, if it opens up an opportunity for you to move to a different kind of job that maybe you like better, that's awesome. On the other hand, for the people who are 45, 50 years old, when the economy changes, to re-skill at that age is challenging. And not just because it's hard for you to learn new skills, but sometimes it's hard for the rest of the world to take you seriously as a new employee doing something in a different industry, right? So then you're sort of stuck. So one of the problems you run into here is unemployment. And I heard, maybe you guys heard this,